In our previous video where we did a quick tour of the client-side grouping functionality, we showed how you can take a list control like this, which is displaying data from customer table in Northwind, and apply client-side grouping. So you can see here, for example, we've grouped the data by country and then within country by city. So let's go take a look now at how this was accomplished. So let's go back to design mode now, and we'll take a look at this button over here. And we can go to the onClick event, and we'll see that this is calling into the list control actions action JavaScript. If we edit the action, we'll see that there's a new action here called client-side group breaks, and then we can specify the list control that we'd like to control. So in this case, there's only one list control called list, and then we can click on the smart field to open up the builder. So the builder here is where we can specify all of the client-side group breaks. In this particular case, we have 2 levels of group breaks, but you can have as many group breaks as you want. So let's take a look here. We can see that for the first level group break, we're sorting by country. So you can see here are all of the available fields that we can sort on, and we've specified we'd like to just simply sort by country. We haven't specified any additional options. We can, for example, specify that this field should be treated as, say, a numeric field for purposes of sorting, or a date field, and specify the date format. The reason that it's important to specify that a field might be numeric or date is that by default all of the data in the list control arrays is character type data, even though it might have, say, a logical context of numeric or date. So in this case, our first level sort is on country. Then we need to specify the break expression. So for each row in the list, this JavaScript expression is evaluated, and if this expression changes value, then a new group break is started. So inside this expression, basically, I can just reference country because that's the field that was used in the sorting expression. So I want to basically break every time the value of the country field changes. If I wanted to break, for example, every time the first character of the country field changed, I could use a JavaScript expression here that returned the first character of the country field. So that would be data.country.substring 0,1. I could also write my own custom function, so I could write a function and then pass into the function data, and that would allow me to write a custom function to compute the group break expression. So basically here we have a simple group break expression, data.country, which means that every time the value in the country field changes, we're going to start a new group break. Next is the header HTML. So this is the HTML that actually shows up in the header, and you can see right now it's set to group. So group is a system field, which is the HTML for the break field. So since we're breaking on the country field, group is going to have the value of the country name at each new group. So you can see that here this particular function can see these 2 variables, group, which is, as we mentioned, the value of the group field, and then data, which is a JavaScript array of all of the data in the current group. So the reason that it's important to have data available to you is that you can use data to compute summary values, and we'll show how you do that a little later on. So let's carry on here. So now we specified the class name for the group, and then for the second level group we're breaking on city, and then within we've specified our break field as data.city, and then our HTML as just simply group. So let's go ahead now, and when we click the button now, the JavaScript gets executed, and that puts in our 2 group breaks. So let's pause now and continue in the next video. So we're continuing now with our video on how to set up client-side grouping, and we're looking now at our list that has 2 levels of grouping. So let's go back to our button now and modify the code so that we put in the count of the number of rows in each group. So we'll go back now to our button over here, click on the editor and bring up the genie, and now we'll go to the header expression for the HTML, and inside this group here we're going to basically add in a space and then count. So recall here that this is a JavaScript expression, so what I'm doing right now is writing JavaScript code that returns a string. So group is a variable name. Then count is a literal string. Now I want the count, so I'm going to just go here and say insert count and then plus. So data.length is the JavaScript code that gives you the number of entries in an array, and recall that data is the array of all of the data that is inside this particular group. So I want to do this, actually I need a single quote there. I want to do this not only for the country group, but I also want to do the exact same thing for the city group. So I'll go there, click the plus key there, and then I'll just say count, and I'll say in city, just to make it a little bit clearer. So now let's go ahead now and run this, and go over now to working preview and hit the count. So you can see basically here, for example, is Austria. There are 2 cities in Austria here, Graz and Salzburg. In Graz there's 1 record, in Salzburg there's 1 record, but the group as a whole has 2 records in it. So here's the ability to add client-side summary data to the list control very easily. Now in this case there's no numeric fields in this particular list over here, but if we go over to this list, which is order details, we can see that we have a field here, for example, called quantity, which is a numeric field, and in this list we've displayed the average order quantity. So let's go look and see how this was done. Now in this case the list is rendered initially displaying the grouping, so we don't have a button that applies the grouping after the fact. So we'll go back now into the list properties, and we can see inside list properties here we have a property here called has client-side group breaks, and then we'll open up the editor. And then if we get now to the HTML expression, we can see now that this HTML expression that displays the average quantity looks quite formidable. So let's actually delete it and start from scratch again. So we'll go here and we'll say that we'd like to insert, so I'll go there and put in a plus, and then let me just getting myself into a bit of a mess there. So let's go here and type in plus single quote, and then I'll go here and say average order quantity, and then plus, and then single quote, like that. And now what I'd like to do over here is insert the JavaScript that's going to give me the average order quantity. So I'll go there and say insert summary field. I want the quantity. I'd like you to treat that as a numeric field. I'd like the average, and then my format, I can bring up the client-side format builder. What I want is a format string that is going to do 2 decimal places. So I'll go dot and then dot 00. So that gives me 2 decimal places. Go ahead and click OK, and then we can see that it's written the expression for us. So we're calling into a method of the UX component called group summary. We're passing in the array of data. This is the field that we'd like to summarize. This is the summary operation that we want. And then this is the formatting code that we'd like to apply. So let's go ahead now and test this out and make sure that we haven't broken anything. And there you go. You can see that we've now got our average quantity. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing our discussion on client-side grouping, and we've just shown how you can write the JavaScript expression to return a summary value from the group and display it in either the group header or the group footer. In this case we're only displaying the group header, but we could very easily turn on group footers as well by going over to group definitions and clicking on the has group footer property over here, which would allow us to then add the group footer to each group break. Now, as we've seen in the first UX over here, in this case the UX component was rendered with no client-side grouping, and then we applied client-side grouping after the fact by clicking on one of these buttons over here. Now the particular button that we clicked on is using Action JavaScript to add the grouping after the fact. On the other hand, when we ran this component over here, the grouping was already done when the list component was rendered. So it doesn't really matter whether you apply the grouping after the fact or you apply the grouping when the list control is rendered. So in this case, the grouping was done by buttons that used Action JavaScript, whereas in this case over here, the grouping was done by going into list properties and turning on the has client-side group break property. So let's go back now to our initial UX component over here, and we can see that in addition to the ability to apply the client-side grouping, we've also got these controls here which show the navigator, hide the navigator, and then also remove the grouping. So this also was done through Action JavaScript. So let's go back now to our button, take a look at the button over here, and we can see that we have an action in Action JavaScript here called client-side group breaks. And then if we go now to show navigator, we can see that there's another action in Action JavaScript called show list navigator. So there's the action show list navigator over there, and then we specify which particular list we're talking to, and then the list navigator settings. So here are the navigator settings, and you can see that the navigator right now has been positioned on the right side of the list, and the options are left, right, top, and bottom. So top and bottom are usually meaningful when the list is set to scroll horizontally. Left and right are more appropriate if the list is scrolling vertically. Then you've got full control over the offset. This is the distance in pixels between the edge of the list and the outside edge of the navigator. So this is 30 pixels between the right edge of the list and the rightmost edge, in this case, of the navigator. Then size here is 30 pixels, so this is the size of the navigator when it's not in use. So what we mean by in use is when the user is not currently dragging on it. When the user starts dragging on the navigator will expand if necessary to show all of the data in the navigator. So if you want the navigator's not in use size, in other words when the user is not dragging on it, to always be the full size of the data in the navigator, you can actually set the size here to -1. You've got full control over the class names of the navigator, and then finally the HTML expression. So this is the expression that returns the data that gets put into the navigator, and this expression can see a system field called HTML. So HTML is the data that is in the group header. So the group header basically is computed based on your settings for your client-side grouping. Then the expression here can return some value. By default, HTML means that the list navigator contains exactly what's in the group header, but you've got the ability to modify that and return, say, a subset or a superset of whatever's in this group header. So if we go here and we look at the code right now, at runtime we can see if we sort by last name, and you can see here that the navigator now is showing A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc. because the group breaks are showing A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc. On the other hand, if we hide the navigator, now let's go here and group by city. So you can see now we're grouped by city. And now if we basically turn the navigator on, we can see that the navigator now, instead of showing A, B, C, D, is showing the list of the cities. So in other words, the navigator is picking up the values in each group header, and by writing our own JavaScript function, we can basically control how these group headers get harvested and placed into the navigator. So then of course we can go ahead and hide the navigator and then also remove the groups. So what we've shown in this video here is how group breaks and navigators can be defined client side. They can be defined either as part of the list definition itself, which means that they'll be rendered when the list is initially rendered, or they can be applied after the fact through your own Action JavaScript code or your own JavaScript code by placing buttons on the UX component that execute the appropriate JavaScript to apply client-side grouping and navigators to the list. Thanks very much for watching.